blah, blah.
Well, social marketing began in the United States and in the developing world. And it began because people realized that by just educating people about their health, it doesn't mean to say that they're going to do anything about it. If you think about it, everybody knows in Europe that smoking is bad for them. You think how many cigarette adverts there are telling people that they shouldn't smoke, the bans on tobacco in most of Europe, in a lot of cafes and restaurants, and also education as well. But still people smoke. So social marketing is a way of utilizing the same kind of tools that are used by private sector marketing. So it's almost like using the devil's tools against the tobacco companies and the other companies that are trying to make people's health bad. So social marketing came very much from the United States, where they had intractable problems around smoking and obesity. And social marketing is really about understanding the people that you're trying to help, to understand why they do things and what there is, what exchange you can give to stop them doing the bad behavior, smoking, drinking, taking drugs. And it's only by understanding the people that you're trying to help can you actually achieve real behavior change. And I'll give you an example that about 10 years ago I was working in the Department of Health in England, and we were trying to develop a program to stop teenage pregnancy. And we were 12 middle-aged civil servants, all white, sitting round a table, trying to think of what it was like to be a young person, maybe vulnerable, and also being, having sex underage, and probably getting pregnant. And I suddenly realized, what did we know about their lives? we knew nothing about their lives. So how could we develop a program? And I can remember us sitting around the table and thinking, well, what we need to do is to get more available condoms so that these young people can stop getting pregnant. And I thought, well, this is ridiculous. How do we know that they don't want to get pregnant? So we went out and had some conversations with these young people. And they said, well, actually, we wanted to get pregnant. We wanted to have a baby because we've never had anybody to love, and nobody's ever loved us. And so it really turned on our head, what we were doing. We were trying to promote condom use, when in fact, these young people wanted to get pregnant. And the behavior change was not around having unprotected sex. It was trying to give them an alternative to the lives that they were leading, trying to discover what other things that we could do and give them, what services we could provide to stop them getting pregnant at such an early age. And so really, social marketing came out of a failure of public health, a failure that was really about trying to educate people and then realizing that education wasn't enough, that you had to really understand the way people acted. Now, for you and me, and for a lot of public health people, we often think the way that people behave is illogical. We think, well, surely these people know they shouldn't be eating chips every night, or they shouldn't be taking drugs. But for those people who are doing that, it's totally logical. And it's trying to ensure that you understand the reasons why people are doing that behavior, and then really understanding what you can give them, what service you can give them that helps them change their behavior for the good. The difference between social marketing and health promotion is that social marketing is a business process. So it's very much starting from a scoping phase, identifying what behavior change that you want to achieve, but also not just about awareness, about how many percentage points do you want to stop smoking by, setting those behavioral objectives really accurately, and then looking at research to try and find out why people behave the way they do and what exchange you can give them. What is it you can do to stop those people doing the behavior that they're currently doing? And then the third and final phase is, after you've implemented, is to do an evaluation, which is then fed back into the program again. So social marketing is a part of health promotion, but it's much more business-led because it's based on marketing principles, private sector marketing principles. And of course, private sector marketing principles are usually around trying to sell a service or trying to sell a product. And effectively, you failed if you don't actually sell that service or sell that product or increase product sales. And in the same way, social marketing is very detailed and very accurate in the type of behavior change that the project is aimed at. So you can't have a social marketing project that is just about raising awareness of how bad smoking is, or raising awareness about 5 a day, people should eat more vegetables. It's very much about, in the same way as private sector marketing is, we expect through this social marketing project to reduce smoking in these certain groups in this certain location, and we expect to do it over a certain time period. So, as I say, social marketing is part of health promotion, but it's very much a business process based on private sector marketing principles. Social marketing's accepted as a process for achieving behaviour change in the UK, Ireland, Scandinavia, and a lot of the new accession states. So states effectively like the UK that doesn't have a lot of money to spend on public health but wants to achieve the best that it can with the resources that it has, We've been less successful in France and Germany. I think it's seen very much as an American way of doing things. And anything that has marketing involved often puts public health or health people off, because they think of marketing as something that has caused the problem. So the marketing of cigarettes, the marketing of fast food, they see that as a problem, not as a solution, whereas we see very much the utilization of marketing processes and concepts to beat these organizations at their own game. So I would say it's almost a kind of a ring where Portugal, even Spain, utilize social marketing. It's obviously used in the United States, very much in the developing world, in India, and China and Hong Kong as well. When I came to the Department of Health about 10 years ago, we had a huge budget that was used in health promotion, mostly going to very clever advertising. But it wasn't really having much impact because it was very broad brush. It was very much aimed at the whole population. And so therefore, I think about £200 million a year was spent on advertising. And when I came into the job, I said, well, how do we know it's having any impact? And everybody said, well, it must be having some impact because we're winning awards for our advertising. So it really was missing the point that we were winning awards for clever advertising, but having no real impact on the people, on the people's behaviors. Social marketing targets specific people who we think of as vulnerable or as hard to reach. So therefore, because you're targeting, you're reducing the amount of money you're having to spend. So the amount of money spent now in advertising is 60–70% lower than it used to be. And all of our services and products around public health are now very much aimed at specific groups of people. And so rather than just targeting the whole population, we're very much targeting specific groups. And so that means we've been able to reduce the amount of money we spend, but increase the actual numbers of people who are actually receiving the benefits of the services that we're developing. So it's very cost effective, and that is one of the benefits. But most of all, it's from the perspective of government, it's actually aiming your services at the people that need them. If you are educated, if you understand your health and how to get health services, you don't need extra help and advertising. It's the people who find difficulty in understanding their own health and how to access health services. They're the people that we need to target. Well, I think the most important thing is especially in public health and virtually all behaviour change, but public health and people's health in particular, is that you have to realise that a quick intervention or a quick campaign is usually not going to have long-term impact. And so therefore you have to think long-term. How can we develop a program that is sustainable? So if you are trying to get young school children to eat more healthily, you can't just develop a 3 or 4 month project that just says, just eat more vegetables. You actually have to change the environment. So you have to work with the school's dinner service, the lunch service. You have to work with parents. You have to work with maybe local grocers, supermarkets, so that everything that you do is long-term and sustainable, so it doesn't rely on public funding. So a project that we were involved with was getting young people to eat more fruit and veg. And what we did was we got a fruit and vegetable stall at the school itself, and we employed somebody for a very short time, and then he started working with the school, and now it's a full-time permanent fixture. So there is a a fruit and vegetable stall at the school, and he earns money from it. But it wasn't there before. We still evaluate, and we're still showing that young children are eating more fruit and vegetables than their counterparts in other parts of the city. So as I say, the history of government action around health, around any behaviour change, is usually short and sharp, and then they go on to something else. Social marketing is about changing the environment, changing the way people act in the long term. If you want to do that, you have to change the environment in which they live. The centre was set up in England because we were failing to achieve a lot of our targets around health. And so the centre was set up to develop expertise out in the National Health Service. In England, the National Health Service employs around 1.3 million people, and it is a service that is given free of charge to everybody in the UK. So we wanted to upskill the relevant people, health promotion people within the UK. So we trained about 5,000 people over a 2-year period in how to develop social marketing programs and campaigns. We also have on our website a whole series of how to do social marketing, online tools, reports, how to commission social marketing. And we also have an online school where people can go and learn about social marketing and get an accreditation for doing that program. So that has been what we've been doing over the last 7 years. We now work in Hong Kong, China, Jordan, the United States on different types of programs. But most of all, that we're there to help organisations develop their competencies and skills around social marketing. The centre was set up by government, but in the UK, a lot of centres of expertise are set up by government and given a short-term grant, 2, 3, 5 years, and then they're expected to develop their own income streams. So that's exactly what's happened to the National Social Marketing Centre. We were given a grant for 5 years, and that grant was used to develop capacity and skills within the health service, but also to develop our own markets as well. So after the 31st of March, we will no longer be part of government. We'll be what's called a social enterprise. And probably you'll recognise a social enterprise as an NGO organisation. So we are a not-for-profit organisation, but not a charity. We're a limited company. So we have to make a profit, but our profits are ploughed back into the organisation. So we don't have shareholders, we don't make profits, but we have to operate a surplus and cover our costs in all our projects. The vision for the National Social Marketing Centre will be that it will work right across the world, delivering social marketing training and expertise. And I suppose the type of projects that we're involved with would be very much dependent on the organisations who have money to pay us. So we would love to do work all around the world, and as a social enterprise, you can actually use your surpluses to deliver programs where there isn't the money. And so we do quite a lot of work in Africa with a number of African governments where we know that they don't have the development funds, or the funds come in a very strange way, so they can't utilise them in the most effective way. So we have done that. But what we're hoping for is that will be used by organisations to develop skills and capacity. And then those organisations can deliver social marketing on their own. We're not a typical consultancy where we come into an organisation and then mushroom. Our whole idea is that we go into an organisation, we build capacity within that organisation then can deliver social marketing, and we can leave and go on somewhere else. large part of social marketing is evaluation and monitoring as well. So when we're developing a program, we continually try and look at how we're evaluating the program during the process. Monitoring is really important. So a key process within the implementation or pre-implementation stage is pre-testing. So whatever program that you've developed, you'll pre-test it with your target group. So if you think of a program that's aimed at young children, getting them to eat more fruit and veg, then you'll pre-test that program with them, with maybe 2 or 3 over a period of time. You'll evaluate that to see whether you think it's a good program to initiate and to develop, or you'll stop and reevaluate, maybe go back to the research again. The real part of evaluation needs to take place when you've implemented and when you are putting your program out into the mainstream. And there are various ways that you can evaluate so that you can test certain parts of the community or the segment to see if they're changing, their behaviors are changing or their attitudes are changing. Because the process of behavior change is quite complex, that you need to go through this process of understanding, of almost saying you're ready to change, and then actually having that change of behavior. So you need to ensure that people are going through those stages of change. So that is important as well. But what is really critical, and what is absolutely never or hardly ever done, is that all the money usually in public health is spent on the product, the advertising, and usually people are evaluating the awareness. How many people saw that ad? How many people thought it was a good ad? But very rarely do public health campaigns have that, well, what was the impact 3 months, 6 months down the line? So we actually have an evaluation tool that's been developed jointly by us, the Department of Health and the National Institute for Clinical Excellence, where we test these behaviours over a 3, 6, 9 months period. Health promotion programs. Most of the organisations that do health promotion programs usually so focused on implementing, and also the fact is that evaluation does sometimes, if it's done well, can take up 20% of the total budget of your program. And so therefore, most people will just say, well, look, we need to spend it on the product or on the advertising or changing the service. But evaluation is absolutely critical, because what you're doing is you're looking at how you can adapt the program further, or how you can help other programs in terms of the learning that you've achieved, the success or failure. And often in our library of programs, we've got an online library of about 70 to 80 social marketing programs. We put in the ones that have failed, because the learning from those failures can be as important for new projects as projects that have succeeded. So that is absolutely critical, and that is hardly ever done because it's expensive, because people don't want to show that they fail. And we found it very difficult to get people to admit, even on social marketing projects where they failed. We found it very difficult to say, well, look, for us, and for all other people who are involved in this particular area, your learning is really important and could be critical in terms of the next stage or the next program in that area. Any topic can be used where you're wanting to achieve behaviour change. So I'll give you an example around transport. We were involved in a programme that was aimed at reducing the number of child deaths in the United States, in the Latin American community, where mothers with maybe 5 or 6 children were driving around in very old cars, but never used any restraints, any car seats. And the traditional health promotion model was used. So they gave out leaflets in Spanish because they thought, well, maybe these people don't understand that you should be using car seats, and there was no behavior change. And then they started thinking, well, maybe people can't afford them, so we'll give away the seats. And they gave away the seats, and there was no uptake. So then a social marketing approach was taken, and we started having conversations with these women. And the insight that came back, the research that came back, was they said, look, we believe in God, and God will decide when He's going to take our children, and our children are safest in our own arms. And we thought, how can we utilize this? How can we utilize this belief? And what we did was we got priests to bless the car seats. And by that, it meant that they believed that God had blessed these car seats. And the car seats, the use of car seats went up by about 75% in this particular community. And it saved untold lives. So if you think about it, it's a public health issue, but it's transport. It's a simple behavior about just putting children in their seats, but really getting an understanding of why people behave the way they do. Because logically you think, if I have a baby, I want it to be as safe as possible. But that wasn't their view. So transport is one area. Finance as well. We've worked with our UK finance department to try and persuade people to make wills. Because when people die, if you don't make a will, then it leads to all sorts of problems. And it was trying to find what was the behaviour that we could change. And it was thinking that it would be very expensive. So we developed a campaign and also some services that allowed people who didn't have a lot of money to make wills very cheaply. Another example is an environment. There was a project in the northeast of England that was trying to insulate people's homes, especially lofts, and it was given away free, and nobody was taking it, and nobody could understand why. And we started doing research, and we found that it wasn't that people didn't want the insulation, but their lofts, you know, the lofts between the sort of the roof and the living space, was just full of junk. So we created a service that was, we'll clear the junk away from your loft, and then we'll put the insulation in. And there was a much more increased uptake of the service. So environment, transport, finance, social marketing can be used in, you know, a lot of different areas, as long as you're trying to achieve behavior change. When we develop a behavior change program, we have to really understand what is important to the people that we're trying to help. And I'll give you one example. We're working on a smoking cessation program for young mothers in Scotland, and we found it very difficult initially to understand what was the exchange, what could we give them to stop them smoking. Because smoking was a really big part of their lives. It was a part, I suppose, their only part of the day, or the only thing that they had that they could say, well, actually, this is my part. It's not about the baby. It's for me. And so therefore we looked and we talked to them for a long time. And what could we give you in exchange? And they sort of said, well, what would be really useful is, you know, if we could treat ourselves in another way. So we very controversially gave them vouchers that they could use in a supermarket. They couldn't, of course, buy cigarettes, but they could buy other things that were, I suppose, an exchange for them in terms of stopping smoking. So they could buy makeup, or they could buy food products they wouldn't ordinarily buy. And we strictly controlled so that we monitored whether they did stop smoking through inhaling, so we had a device that we could test. And that had the impact of them stopping smoking during their pregnancy. And a lot of the young people actually stopped right the way through, so stopped altogether. We could only give them vouchers for a certain period of time. Now that's a very controversial part of social marketing, because effectively you're paying people to stop being bad. And it means you could actually, a lot of our critics have said, well, actually you could get people starting smoking just so they could get the £12. Well, of course, that's not the case. And this is just in a very particular group of young women that wouldn't have given up smoking in any other way. But the whole idea about it wasn't really about the woman. It was about the baby. It was making sure that the baby was born healthy. And that was the key decider in terms of us going forward, was that we knew that with this particular group of women, that the only way that we were going to get them to stop smoking was to give them a monetary exchange. And that had the impact of the babies being born much more healthy, but also the fact that even after pregnancy, 50% of the women that were on the program actually gave up smoking because they realized actually how healthy they felt and what an impact it had in terms of their young babies' lives as well. So while we were doing this, we were also giving them some health education as well, the impact of smoking in the same room or in the same environment as your baby. And that actually was instrumental in these young mothers giving up smoking after the program was finished. Once again, it's about long-term behavior change, not just about having that quick, short, sharp stopping of behaviors and then restarting again. Well, I think it depends on whose behavior you're trying to change. If you're trying to change the behavior of the corrupt, then that is very difficult, if that's an ingrained behavior. But if you're trying to lower, I suppose, the acceptance of corruption, then that is something where social marketing can be used, or at least some elements of social marketing can be used, especially about the understanding of the various communities that live in Croatia and what they believe is acceptable. You probably find, and I've got no evidence to show this, but you probably find in a lot of communities, or a lot of different segments of society in Croatia, there's almost an acceptance that corruption exists, it will always exist. What you have to work on is to try and persuade influential groups in Croatia that that isn't the case, that corruption doesn't have to exist, it shouldn't exist, and there should be a point in time where corruption is at a very low level. So I think social marketing can be used, but it's a very difficult process, but it can be used in the research area. There is a lot of ideas that you could have an anti-corruption campaign, and I think that is possible. A lot of organizations throughout the Western world, especially in countries we work in Africa, have anti-corruption campaigns. But it's, what are you trying to achieve in that anti-corruption campaign? Are you trying to achieve behavior change in the people who are being corrupt? You can't do that. I think it's really identifying key segments in society who have a lot of power and influence over other segments of society, and to try and persuade them that corruption is not acceptable, and also to try and effectively influence those key segments of society. You'll probably find that there are, thousands rather than millions of people that you need to influence, but it's finding out who are those people and how can you get to them, and what message you have to give to them. It's really focusing on what is it you actually want to achieve, short term, medium term, long term. What is it you're trying to actually deliver? And that, it's the same old raising awareness, doesn't actually have any impact at all. You know, we can raise awareness about all sorts of things, but if people don't know what they're supposed to do, and that is a big thing in public health, is, you know, you say don't smoke or eat 5 a day. Sometimes people don't know how to do that. What is 5 a day? How do I eat 5 vegetables a day? And it's the same in corruption. I would imagine that, you know, yeah, corruption is bad. Everybody knows it's bad. We should do something about it. What are you wanting us to do? What are, you know, specifically at people in society who are key players, you know, people who are just sitting below the government ministers. And a lot of our programs are aimed at very few people who are quite high up in the civil service, or people who are working in NGOs, working in kind of the European organizations. So it's very important that you understand who are the key players, who can actually influence the people, and that is critical. Social enterprises that I think you consider as social enterprises are those that are producing a service or a product. And they vary in size from John Lewis, which is a huge departmental store, and I think it employs around 100,000 people across the UK. There's also a water company, that Welsh Water, which is also a social enterprise. But the key characteristic of a social enterprise in the UK is that it's not for profit. And the people who utilise its services, like Welsh Water, the people who are taking the service, are members of the social enterprise. So, in fact, they get the profits. If any profit is made, it goes back to the people who are either employed by the social enterprise, or people who are buying or are being produced for the social enterprise. I think there are around 50,000 social enterprises in the UK, but a social enterprise in the UK, there's very, very many different types of social enterprise, from what would be a commune to a large corporation that has just decided that it's going to create itself into a social enterprise. And I have to say that a lot of people in society value social enterprises because there is a backlash against, I suppose, the banks, these big corporations that have shareholders. Social enterprises are very much about serving the community, serving the people that work for them. So I think it's becoming more fashionable. And I think certainly over the next 10, 15 years, the social enterprise sector will increase dramatically, simply because people now think who they're buying from, they think whose service they're going to go to, and they think of a social enterprise as an enterprise that is thinking about often the environment, often the people that are working there, and often the people who are paying for the goods and services. Social entrepreneurship and social enterprises are quite a large part of the UK industrial sector now. It's been a programme that has been running now for about 10 years, and it was initially set off by the last government, but still has been adopted by the present government. And it's, I suppose, what's called the third sector. So it's not quite government, and it's not quite private sector, it's in between. And the main reason for promoting this sector was that the government itself wants to reduce the amount of government in the whole sector of the UK. So it wants to reduce the government sector down to a minimum and allow free enterprise to start delivering services that had been historically been delivered by the private sector. So in health, there are social enterprises set up to deliver health services. There are social enterprises to help set up programs for young people. So a very good example is Jamie Oliver. I don't know if people will know here Jamie Oliver. I think you probably will. Set up a social enterprise to help young people who ordinarily wouldn't have had a chance of working in a very good restaurant, but he takes people who are very vulnerable, often people without qualifications. He gives them training, and then those people who are trained then either work in his business or get jobs elsewhere. So social enterprises are usually developed around parts of the sector of the UK where I suppose government has historically been involved, but now it's moving more into the private sector. And I think the idea was to get private sector skills into those areas that historically have been developed by and run by the public sector. Social enterprise is a model it has a governance process around it. So you have to abide by a certain set of rules to be called a social enterprise. And so therefore, you can't just turn a big corporation into a social enterprise. You would have to change the way it worked. And of course, a lot of organizations would find it very difficult because all big corporations, of course, have shareholders. And that isn't the case with social enterprise. They have members and people who work for them. So it is a problem in terms of the big corporations. But of course, they can create social enterprises. And that has been possible too. So that you'll find a number of big organizations that have created social enterprises to deliver certain parts of their CSR work. So that is possible as well. I think the recipe for excellence in social marketing is really never to be put off too much by what organizations and clients want. That often they want you to deliver a sparkling new product or service. And often the most important thing in a social marketing project is probably not very sexy or not very interesting. It's probably a change in the way the service is delivered or training the way people act with each other. We've done a lot of projects with health professionals, for instance, so that we've retrained health professionals. So it's really making sure that all the time that you follow the business process, which is proven, not getting too tied up with the client, the organization, wanting something sparkly and new, and always keeping in mind that what you're trying to achieve is behavior change, and what you're not trying to do is to develop a fantastic new advertising campaign. It's all about really homing in on the people that you're trying to work with, and then working with them to develop an intervention that is attractive to them. And that will mean that if it is attractive to them, they will change their behavior. If they feel as though it's been done to them, they won't change their behavior. And you see that all the way through, that people who think that a product or a program is being developed externally, and despite them, they'll just ignore it. And that's really important. Blah, blah, blah.